Greetings everyone, back again with another installment of the Philco Predicta full dress restoration. Put in a big parts order yesterday, so in a few days hopefully I'll have my other required parts so I can keep going. And in the meantime, made some little more progress, so we'll go through that. I guess starting out, remember this filament resistor, or I should say suspected filament resistor, has this jumper across it, and I was kind of curious as to why that was. Looking in the schematic, I did find out that this is indeed a dropper for the CRT filament, and as you recall, the original CRT this was spec for was a 21 EAP4, which has a filament of 2.31 volts, whereas it was replaced by a 21 FDP4, which is 6.3 volts. So this is on the 6.3 volt rail that feeds all the rest of the tubes in the set. But then they put this 7 ohm resistor on there to drop it down. So with 21 FTP4, this isn't needed, so this just negates it. So either way, if we keep the tube that's in there, that jumper can stay put and we can leave this alone. If I should have to replace it with a lower voltage filament, just snip that out, we're good. And another interesting thing here is there's a network buried in all of this for the vertical retrace blanking, and it's in the schematic. I've looked through all these wires and cannot find it. Well, if you look very carefully, try to get a pointer in here, you can just see the edge of it right here. Here's the side of it. So what I had to do was I had to loosen the vertical output transformer so I could see it. So it's buried down in there. It'll be fun getting that out, but fortunately that's only 3 wires, and I'll be replacing it with discrete components. So more on that in just a moment. But let me flip over the chassis and we'll look over the other work that's been done so far. Okay, we're now looking at the video and sound synchronization section. For the most part, I was able to flip this one up. However, I did have to disconnect the wires for the volume and tone controls, as well as 3 other wires that come up from the side. But other than that, they all come up from the top, so I was able to flip this up to get at the underside of the board. So this one's all been gone through. I'm just waiting on networks to put those in, and then I can button this side back up. Found out how to remove the flyback cage, so you can take a really good look inside there. The coating on the flyback doesn't look too bad compared to other ones I've seen. There's just one little chunk missing out of the bottom there, but I'll put some Corona dope on that to seal that up and stabilize it. Also, there's a resistor behind this socket here for the yoke, and then there's another one underneath the high voltage rectifier socket for the high voltage going to the picture tube. So I need to fish in there and replace those. One other thing, we recall that the B plus fuse was indeed blown in this set, and that doesn't surprise me. If the caps and that went bad or something happened with one of the tubes in there, it could cause a short and cause it to blow. And these are these little tabbed fuses, and luckily I have a box of these. These are 7/10 slow blow type fuses. However, these fuses are getting kind of hard to come by. You can still find them on eBay and that, but I haven't found a supplier that sells the ones with the little tabs on there for these turn and lock type fuse holders that you see in a lot of old sets. So I'm going to replace it with a modern fuse holder, and that way a standard AGC cartridge fuse can go in there no problem. And then anyone who needs to service this set down the road in the future won't have such a hard time finding parts. Another question that came up from the last video was they noticed that there was these little things taped to the side of this IF can, and actually it's little pieces of heat shield. It was taped one on each side because that IF can is flanked by a couple of tubes. So we'll have to put these back in place. I've got some Kapton tape I can tape them back on with, because the original tape, as we can see, has just dried out and the adhesive is long since given up. So we'll be doing that for that board, and hopefully, like I said, once I get the networks, that will button all that up. I also researched this little coil here with the jumper on it. This is actually going to the damper tube, and there's one going to the plate of the damper, one going to the cathode of the damper. And I suspect that this tube may have shorted at one time and took this out. So a repairman just put a jumper across it. Researching this, I'm told it's not a very critical part to have the value perfect on. So other Predictas did use these in this circuit, although they're a very slightly different value, but it's still better than, you know, a straight short across it. So I'm probably going to transplant one out of a junk set I've got in here, and that should help button that up. Last point I wanted to make was, I mentioned these K-networks or couplates or component packs. There's various names that these go by. I like to replace these just because in most instances these boards are difficult to remove, and sometimes the ones, particularly in the vertical section from what I read, are prone to having problems. So I just like to replace them. And I used to just make them out of breadboard, taking various discrete parts, putting them on here, and then cutting this to size. But after a while that gets to be kind of a pain, and I go through these things at quite a rate. So I finally just started having a board made. This is an example of one as it comes from the manufacturer that I get these from. And I just simply cut them apart along these lines and then populate it with parts, put wire leads on them, and then they go into the board where they need to be. So I'm going to get some made for this. I designed the circuits and sent them off to have the boards printed, so hopefully late next week I'll have those. And then we can really start getting this thing back together and hopefully get ready to test it. So until then, see you then.